Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story. Story number 1. The first story follows a driver named Mark, who had been hauling freight long enough to know every trick the highway could play on tired eyes. Mirages on hot pavement, distant taillights that vanished when he got close, shadows that flicked through the beams of his headlights like stray thoughts. He ran mostly overnight routes, preferring the empty roads and the feeling that the world had shrunk to just his truck, the lane markings, and the quiet voice of the GPS. One late autumn night, he was eastbound on a long interstate cut through rolling hills and patches of heavy forest. His trailer was full but not too heavy, and the run was familiar. Warehouse to distribution center, a route he could have described from memory. He checked the time on the dash. A little after 2 in the morning. The kind of hour when the mind drifted off to odd places if it wasn't reined in. He took a sip of coffee that had gone lukewarm and turned down the radio a touch. The night outside looked clean and clear, no fog, no rain, just the endless stripe of road and the curve of the guardrails. Up ahead, a green overhead sign approached in the cone of his headlights. White letters slid into focus. Exit 47, Ridge Point Rest Area, 1 mile. Mark felt a little flicker of relief. The last few hours had been empty, no open truck stops, no big lit-up gas stations, just closed exits and dark off-ramps. He wasn't falling asleep, but that familiar, dull ache behind his eyes reminded him that a quick stretch would do him good. Ridge Point wasn't huge, but it had a truck lot and some vending machines. He had stopped there enough times to picture it, a simple pull-off with a line of spaces and a small brick building that always smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. He guided the rig along the smooth curve of the interstate. A smaller blue sign followed the first one. Truck parking, showers, snacks. The sight of it felt like a promise. Mark watched his mirrors, checked the lane next to him empty, and signaled. The ramp appeared on the right, a dark tongue of asphalt peeling away from the highway. He eased onto it, tires humming as rumble strips buzzed faintly beneath him. Then he frowned. The rest area was darker than he remembered. Ridge Point usually had a kind of soft glow to it. Sodium lights shining over the truck lot, a lit doorway, a few cars scattered around. Tonight, the only light came from his own beams and a pair of weak yellow lamps near the entrance. No other rigs. No cars. No illuminated vending machines shining through the glass. He pulled slowly into the lot. The painted lines appeared pale beneath his headlights, crisp and fresh, as though they had been redone recently. The brick building loomed ahead, squat and familiar, but only one window showed a bit of light from inside, thin and dim. Mark parked near the outer edge, engine still idling. He listened to the vibration of the truck for a moment, watching the building. Nothing moved. The silence felt heavier than usual. Not peaceful, exactly more like the quiet of a house where someone might be standing just out of sight, listening. He told himself it was just fatigue. Maybe the highway patrol had asked the cleaners to cut the lights, or maybe there was a power issue and only emergency fixtures were on. It was late. Not every place stayed cheerful around the clock. Still, when he cut the engine, the sudden drop in noise made his ears ring faintly, and the dark pressed in a little. He climbed down from the cab, his boots touching the asphalt with a hollow sound that echoed more than it should have in the empty lot. The air was cool, smelling of dry leaves and faint exhaust from his own truck. Not even crickets seemed to be calling from the tree line. Mark stretched, rolling his shoulders. The vending machines stood to one side, near the glass doors. In his memory, they had been bright and colorful, humming away behind scratched plexiglass. Now, they were off, just shapes in the dark, reflecting his silhouette. He walked closer, footsteps steady, trying not to let his mind build this into something it wasn't. As he neared the building, the lone-lit window resolved into a soft, yellowish rectangle. The light didn't quite reach the ground. It looked like a single bulb on inside, maybe in a maintenance room. The glass doors to the lobby were shut, but not locked. He pulled one open and was met by a faint chemical smell and the whisper of the door's hinges. The interior was dim, illuminated by one flickering fluorescent tube in the ceiling. Tiles on the floor gleamed dully. No one stood at the information desk. No security guard. No other travelers sitting on the benches. The soda machines along the wall were dark. Their digital displays were blank, no red or green numbers glowing. A sign on the restroom door said open in peeling letters, but no light shone from beneath it. Mark moved slowly, feeling the slight echo of his steps as he crossed to the men's room. When he tapped the door, it swung inward on squeaky hinges. Inside, the light was working just one harsh bulb, but enough. Off-white tiles, stalls, sinks, everything perfectly ordinary. He washed his hands and splashed some water on his face, watching himself in the mirror. The reflection looked normal, a tired man in his 40s, trucker's tan marked across his face, cap shadowing his eyes. Nothing out of place, but something still felt tipped to one side, as if the world's details had been set back just slightly wrong. He turned off the water and listened. Somewhere, faintly, a vent fan hummed. Otherwise, silence. Back in the lobby, he checked his phone. No new messages, no bars of service, which was odd. This stretch usually had at least a little signal. The time ticked over from 2:13 to 2:14. Mark decided a quick walk around the lot might help clear his head before he got back behind the wheel. He didn't like how jumpy the empty building made him feel. He pushed through the doors and stepped outside again. The night air brushed his face, cool and dry. His truck waited where he had left it, a quiet, hulking outline. He walked along the row of painted spaces, boots scuffing the asphalt, letting himself breathe. The tree line around the rest area crowded close. Dark branches, framing the glow of the distant interstate. He could see headlights far off, sliding past, proof that the world beyond this pocket still moved. Then he realized something. There was no sound from the road. He stopped, listening harder. The highway ran no more than a few hundred yards away. At any other rest area, at any time of night, the soft roar of passing vehicles was constant, a steady rush like the ocean in the distance. Now, the air was empty. No engines, no tires, just the faint ticking of his cooling truck. He squinted toward the interstate. Headlights still flowed by, white lines gliding steadily in both directions. But they did so in silence, like a film playing on a screen with the sound turned off. A slow chill slipped up the back of his neck. He told himself it was trick of wind direction, or maybe a stand of trees blocking the noise. That could happen. Sound could behave oddly at night. There were explanations for almost anything, but the silence wrapped around him like something tangible. He forced himself to keep walking, circling the truck, checking tires, peeking beneath the trailer out of habit. Everything was fine. His rig was solid and ordinary. He ran a hand along the side of the trailer, feeling cool metal and tiny bumps where the rivets Saturday, grounded by the simple touch. He exhaled and decided he had let his imagination get the better of him. Time to go. He climbed back into the cab, settled into the seat, and reached for the ignition. As he did, he glanced at the dashboard clock again. 18:25. He hesitated. He had just watched it flip to 2. 14 inches the lobby. He was sure of it. Maybe his phone clock and the truck clock weren't perfectly in sync. That happened. Electronics reset themselves. Time drifted, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the last few minutes had slid off in some strange direction. He shook his head, turned the key, and let the engine rumble back to life. The sound filled the cab, comforting in its familiarity. The gauges lit up. The headlights reached outward, catching the painted lines of the lot and the low building. Mark signaled, pulled forward, and rolled slowly back toward the exit lane. The sign pointing to the interstate stood where it always had, white letters on green. To I-37 East, divided by West. He followed it, tires humming over the pavement, past the dark vending machines, past the lonely little patch of lit window, and out onto the ramp. The merge onto the main line came up, as expected. The empty highway waited. He checked his mirrors, still nothing behind him, and eased back onto the interstate, picking up speed. The rest area fell away in his mirror, shrinking into a small square of blackness against the trees. Soon, the rhythm of the road returned. Lane markers slid under him. The dashboard clock moved to 2:16. Then, 2:20. Mark settled into the drive. hands steady at 10 and 2, mind beginning to drift into that half-focused state truckers knew well. Not quite daydreaming, but not fully anchored to every second either. After a while, another green overhead sign appeared in the distance. Its glow looked familiar. Exit 47, Ridgepoint Rest Area, 1 mile. Mark blinked. He frowned and checked the GPS mounted on the dash. According to the little digital map, he had been traveling east for 32 minutes since leaving the last rest area. The cursor moved steadily along the interstate line. No loops, no turnarounds, no strange detours. Yet the sign was unmistakable. Same exit number, same name, same promise of a place to stop. A dull, slow unease settled into his chest. Maybe the state had built 2 rest areas off the same numbered exit, one for each direction. That wasn't unheard of. But he could have sworn Ridgepoint had been a single shared spot on a median, used by both sides. The smaller blue sign followed. Truck parking, showers, snacks. Exactly the same positions of words. The same little icons. He told himself it was a coincidence. Then he watched as the exit ramp rose up on the right, the curve of it matching his memory too perfectly. The same line of reflective posts, the same shallow dip where the asphalt met the shoulder. His hands were suddenly damp on the wheel. A normal driver might have kept going, written it off as fatigue, and found another place later. But Mark had spent years on these roads. He knew mile markers, exit patterns, the way departments of transportation planned layouts. Something in him needed to make sense of this. So, jaw tight, he clicked the turn signal and took the ramp. The rumble strips greeted him the same way as before, buzzing faintly under his tires. He crept forward, slower this time, eyes sweeping every detail. The rest area spread in front of him. The same dark truck lot. The same 2 weak yellow lamps by the entrance. No cars. No other trucks. The same dim rectangle of light in that same window. He pulled into a different space, carefully noting the painted numbers stenciled on the asphalt. Space 18. Before, he had parked near the far edge. Space 5, if his memory held. He cut the engine. The silence fell again like a soft, thick blanket. His phone still showed no service. The time, 2:13. Mark sat motionless, fingers still curled around the steering wheel. His breath sounded too loud in the cab. He refused to look in the mirrors for a long second, afraid of what he might see there. When he finally did, he saw only his trailer, the empty lot behind, and the dark line of trees. He swallowed, considering his options. Staying put made no sense. There was no fuel here, no food, no reason. But driving off had already led him right back. Then another thought came. Maybe he had nodded off at the wheel and never left the first time. Maybe his mind had wandered and built this whole sequence as a kind of waking dream. That would explain the clock oddities, the missing sounds. It was safer to believe that than the alternative. To test it, he decided to change something. Do something so clearly, different that, if it repeated, he would know for sure. He climbed down from the cab, heart bumping hard but evenly, and walked toward the building again. This time, he didn't go inside. Instead, he turned left and followed the narrow sidewalk that wrapped along the side of the structure, away from the main entrance. The path took him between the brick wall and a low hedge. Leaves rustled faintly as he passed. The building's single dim window was now above and behind him. Another, smaller service door appeared ahead, metal and featureless. At the corner of the building, the path ended. Behind the rest area, a short stretch of gravel spread out, ending at a chain-link fence. Beyond the fence was the tree line he had seen from the lot, branches knit together into a dark wall. A small utility shed sat to one side, its door padlocked. No vehicles, no people, no sound. Mark walked up to the fence and rested his hands lightly on the cold metal. Through the diamond pattern, he could see the first few rows of trees. Their trunks stood close together, bark pale in the slight spill of light from the building. The forest beyond was almost pure black. He listened. No wind, no insects. Slowly, he turned, sweeping his gaze along the fence, the shed, the back of the building. It was all solid, unmoving, ordinary. And yet, the longer he stood there, the more it felt as though the forest wasn't just trees, as though there were shapes out there between the trunks, standing perfectly still, just far enough back to be swallowed by shadow. He stared, eyes straining, but could make out nothing definite. The feeling did not leave. Mark backed away from the fence, unwilling to turn his back to the trees until he had no choice. He followed the path along the building again and returned to the front lot. His truck waited, lone giant in the painted spaces. Before climbing back in, he stopped and looked up at the sky. It was almost starless. A thin smear of cloud covered most of it, but here and there, a few points of light shone through. Only, they didn't seem to twinkle. They held steady, sharp, like pinpricks in a dark surface. He had grown used to the sky and all its moods over the years. This didn't feel like any of them. Mark got back into the cab and closed the door with more force than he meant to. The air inside the truck felt safer, smaller. He took a steadying breath and turned the key. The engine came alive again. The dashboard clock read 2:12. His vision narrowed to that glowing pair of numbers. The seconds ticked up. 2:12, 2:13, 2:14. No skips. No jumps. He put the truck in gear, checked his mirrors once more, and rolled toward the exit. This time, his focus was absolute. Every inch of pavement, every post, every scrap of reflective striping burned into his memory. He followed the ramp back to the highway, merged, watched the white line slide under him. 5 minutes, 10, 15. The GPS still showed him crawling east along the same interstate. Then the shape of a green sign rose ahead, reflected faintly on the underside of an overpass. Exit 47, Ridgepoint Rest Area, 1 mile. A quiet, helpless laugh slipped out of his throat before he could stop it. The blue sign, the ramp, the whole pattern, repeating like a skipping record. Mark kept going this time. He drove past the exit, knuckles white on the wheel. The rest area's entrance flashed by on his right, dark, and nearly identical to the one he had just left, if he had ever truly left. He watched the mirror as the ramp fell away behind him. The building was just a dark block now. The faint window light didn't show at this angle. He drove. 10 minutes. 20. The mile markers ticked upward. 51. 52. 53. That, at least, matched expected distances. The GPS arrow crept along. The dashboard clock moved forward, second by second, but the sky stayed the same dull, mottled dark. The silence of the highway held. No other vehicles approached from behind. No one passed. The headlights he saw in the distance ahead remained stubbornly far away, neither growing closer nor disappearing. His world had narrowed to his own truck and an endless slice of interstate. Somewhere around what the clock claimed was 3 a.m., another sign appeared. Its green face looked almost gray in his lights. Exit 47, Ridgepoint Rest Area, 1 mile. This time he did not laugh. His breathing came shallow now. For the first time in years, genuine fear, not just caution, not just alertness, settled into his muscles. He knew roads. He knew maps. He knew that this should not be happening. He passed the exit again and again. Sometimes the mile markers between seemed right. Sometimes they repeated. At one point, the number on a marker was lower than the one before it. When he checked in the mirror, that previous marker was not there. The GPS froze, its digital map no longer scrolling. Then the screen went blank, rebooted, and came back showing only a simple arrow on an empty grid, as if no roads existed at all. His phone, lying on the passenger seat, remained without signal. The battery indicator did not move. 78%, steady, for what felt like an hour. Mark drove, because there was nothing else to do. Stopping on the shoulder felt like surrendering to whatever this was, and there was some stubborn core in him that refused to give it that satisfaction. He tested things. He flicked his high beams on and off, tapped the horn, turned the radio dial slowly from one end of the band to the other. Only static answered him. No distant voices, no music. Once, through a crackle on AM, he thought he heard the faintest whisper of a weather report mentioning a town he had never heard of. Then it dissolved into noise again. Time lost meaning. The clock said 3:27, then 3:19, then jumped to 4:2. At some point, his exhaustion, his training, and his terror reached a balance. A simple, clear thought floated through his mind. He was not going to think his way out of this. He gripped the wheel, and for the first time, spoke out loud to the empty cab. "Take me back." His voice sounded small over the engine's hum. He didn't know who or what he was addressing. The road, the night, the strange pattern that had locked around him. It didn't matter. The words were more for him than for anything outside. The next time the sign for exit 47 rose ahead, he took it. Not out of curiosity, not to test it, but as if following instructions he didn't remember hearing. The ramp waited. The lot waited. The rest area building waited. This time, when he parked and cut the engine, he did not get out. He sat with his hands in his lap, watching his own reflection in the dark window of the side mirror. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, he heard something he had not heard all night. Another engine. Low, distant at first, then a little louder. It did not sound like a modern truck. Older, maybe? A softer rumble? A different pitch? Headlights swept along the interstate beyond the trees, slow and steady. The sound of that engine grew closer, not in front of him, but around him somehow, like it was approaching from behind an invisible wall. Mark turned his head toward the entrance of the lot. A rig rolled in. An older model, paint faded, company logo barely visible on the door. It pulled into a space across from him and stopped. The engine went still. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw someone in the other cab. A shape. A shadow. Then, in the strange half-light of the rest area, it was just dark glass. They sat like that, two trucks facing each other in the empty lot, for what might have been a minute or an hour. The pressure in the air shifted, the way it sometimes did before a storm. Mark's ears popped softly. Somewhere above, the flickering fluorescent inside the building buzzed to life at full brightness, spilling a bit more glow through the front windows. He blinked. The sound of distant traffic rolled back into the night, as if a volume knob had been turned up. Engines. Tires on asphalt. Long, low whooshes of passing vehicles. The sky overhead brightened a shade. Not dawn, but the slightly lighter dark before it. A breeze slipped through the trees, carrying the dry rustle of leaves. Mark stared at the other truck. Its windshield no longer looked like a mirror. It was empty inside. Dusty. The license plate on the front was so worn, he could barely make out the numbers. He checked his phone. 3 bars of service had appeared. The time read 4:46. Notifications scrolled in. Missed calls, messages, app alerts. The date was the same. Somewhere down the lot, a car pulled in, tires crunching over a stray patch of gravel. A tired-looking driver in a hoodie got out, walked toward the building, and glanced around, completely unaware of anything unusual. The rest area looked normal. Still quiet. Still not busy, but normal. Mark turned the key, and his own engine rumbled back to life. He felt the vibration in his bones, and took comfort from it. He didn't look too closely at the other truck as he eased past it toward the exit. But he couldn't help noticing the inspection sticker on the windshield as it passed through his headlights. The date on it had expired more than 15 years earlier. He took the ramp to the highway, merged, and watched the rest area fall away in his mirror. Traffic flowed now. A box truck moved steadily in the right lane ahead of him. A car with a bike rack passed in the left. The world felt aligned again. He drove until the sun began to push a thin gray line across the horizon. At the first large, busy truck stop he found, he pulled in, parked among a forest of other rigs, and sat for a long time before he trusted his legs enough to climb down. Inside, among the smell of frying food and coffee, the low murmur of conversations, and the clatter of dishes, the night felt like a distant dream. But when he pulled a paper map from a rack near the door and found his route, his finger traced the interstate easily. There, clearly marked at mile 47, was a rest area called Ridge Point. Just one. Later, talking with other drivers at tables and in passing, he heard stories about that exit. Most of them were just rumors, half joking. That the place felt strange at certain hours, that clocks acted funny there, that a driver who had wrecked nearby years ago had never really left. Mark listened, and did not share his own night. After that run, he changed his preferred route, added an extra stretch of 2-lane highway to bypass that particular exit. It cost him some time, but that was fine. Because on some nights, as he rolled along under a normal, twinkling sky, surrounded by ordinary highway sounds, his mind would drift back to a silent stretch of interstate, where the only constant was exit 47, and to a rest area that felt like a loop laid over the map, waiting for anyone alone enough and tired enough to slip into it. And he never again let his clock tick past 2 in the morning anywhere near Ridge Point. Story number 2. Dana liked the night shift for the same reasons most people avoided it. Fewer cars, fewer distractions, just the truck, the ribbon of highway, and the low, steady murmur of the engine. She hauled refrigerated freight across a long stretch of flat country, a wide, open state where the land ran straight to the horizon, and the sky felt bigger than anything built below it. Tonight was one of those clear, dry nights when the stars looked sharp enough to cut. The clock on her dash read 1:37 a.m. The road ahead was black, with the faint silver blur of lane markers. Behind her, the trailer sat steady, the temperature gauges glowing a calm green. She'd topped off at a truck stop hours back, grabbed a coffee, and settled in for the long, uneventful pull east. Dana drove with one hand light on the wheel, elbow propped on the armrest, her gaze flicking between the headlights' reach and the mirrors. An old habit. Check the cargo, check the blind spots, check the empty highway behind. The CB radio on her dash was something of an antique, a holdover from an earlier phase of her career. Most drivers she knew relied more on phones and apps now, but she liked the comfort of a voice traveling through static. She kept it set low, just enough to hear if someone nearby called out a warning about a hazard or a patrol car tucked in the median. For most of the night, however, it had been quiet. A few bursts of chatter miles back, then nothing. Open channel. Soft. Static. She shifted in her seat, eased around a gentle bend, and watched as the next green overhead sign drifted into view. Exit 112, Hartley, 2 miles. She didn't need to stop. Her fuel was fine, and she wasn't tired enough to sleep yet. The miles slid by under invisible tires, the kind of steady, monotonous progress that turned hours into something soft and blurred. Then, through the faint hiss of the CB, a voice cracked in. "Breaker, anyone got ears on mile 209 eastbound?" Dana's hand went automatically to the volume dial, turning it up a notch. The voice sounded male, mid-range, with the slightly flattened vowels she associated with farmers and small-town mechanics. There was nothing unusual about it except for how distant it seemed, like it had traveled farther than normal through the airwaves. "Breaker, 19, anybody out there near mile 209 east? Got an emergency situation, come back." She glanced at the GPS. The little arrow showed her rolling past mile 108. Mile 209 was hours ahead, if she stayed on this route. She pressed the talk button out of habit. "Eastbound, you're 100 out from me. What's going on at 209? Static answered. The channel stayed open long enough that she could hear the faint sound of wind on the other end. Then it clicked off. No reply. Dana frowned, thumb hovering over the button. Sometimes signals bounced, caught strange, far-off snippets. It happened. She listened. Nothing. Just the low, even hiss. "Could be Skip," she said softly to herself, turning the volume back down. Weather's clear, though. The next 20 minutes passed without incident. Hartley came and went in the dark. A lone set of taillights appeared far ahead and slowly grew larger. She caught up and passed a smaller straight truck, exchanged the traditional little flick of the headlights, and let it fall back behind her. The road settled again. At 2:03 a.m., the CB crackled to life a second time. "Breaker, mile 209 eastbound. We've got a jackknife. Repeat, we've got a jackknife in the hammer lane. Anybody reading this?" Dana's attention snapped fully to the radio. That same voice, same pitch, same odd, faraway quality. Her fingers tightened on the wheel. Mile 209 again. She pressed the button. "Copy, eastbound. But I'm still nowhere near 209. You got anybody close to you?" Static. A faint, muffled sound, maybe shouting, maybe something else leaked through the hiss. The hair on the back of her neck prickled. "Come on, talk to me," she murmured, more to herself than the radio. "Are you rebroadcasting something?" Her GPS still showed the same interstate, same slow crawl of numbers. Mile 124. Then 125. No anomalies, no reroutes. Her phone lay in the cup holder, with a small cluster of signal bars. Everything normal. The CB remained stubbornly silent. She considered switching channels, seeing if anyone else had heard, but another instinct held her back. If there was some kind of emergency feed or rebroadcast, she didn't want to lose it. Instead, she left the volume up and focused on the drive, feeling the muscles in her shoulders stay just a little too tight. The highway flattened further. Reflective signs glimmered and vanished. The sky above stayed clear, star-crowded. Now and then, the faint orange glow of a distant town hovered on the horizon, then slipped away behind. At 2:19 a.m., the radio spoke again. Eastbound. Anybody. We're at Daugantanaw. Repeat. Daugantanaw. Can't clear it. The rest dissolved into a deep, warbling roar of static that seemed to swallow not only the voice but the ambient cab noise as well. For a breathless instant, Dana felt as though she were driving underwater, all sound thick and muffled. She snapped the volume down, then up, testing, as if she could shake the interference loose. The roar faded, leaving a ringing kind of quiet behind. Dana licked her lips. This doesn't make sense. CB skip was one thing. A fragment of a conversation from 100 miles away, sure. But the exact same mile marker mentioned, multiple times, with no variation, no other context, no other callers cutting in, that was something else. She checked the old atlas she kept tucked beside the seat, flipping it open with one hand in the glow of the dashboard. Her route was there in neat inked lines, and she traced east with a fingertip. Mile 209 would put her just shy of a large river crossing, near a small city with a cluster of exits and an interchange. Nothing on the map marked it as unusual. She closed the atlas. The paper felt rougher than usual under her hand. A low fog began to creep along the edges of the highway, appearing so gradually she almost didn't notice it. One moment the shoulder was clear blacktop and scruffy grass. The next, a pale waist-high mist hugged the ground in patches, catching her headlights and throwing back a milky glow. Dana narrowed her eyes. The weather forecast she'd checked at the last stop hadn't mentioned fog, but ground fog could roll in unexpectedly in these flatlands, especially near rivers or low spots. Mile 209 is near a river, she remembered aloud. As if summoned by the thought, the next green sign she passed announced, river crossing, 85 miles. She did a quick bit of mental math. The numbers lined up, about where mile 209 would be. The CB radio stayed quiet now, which somehow felt worse. The silence after those fragmented calls carried its own weight. She drove on, every new mile marker a small, ticking reminder that she was getting closer. 168, 176, 192. The fog thickened. It no longer clung only to the ditches. It began edging into the lanes, weaving in delicate, shifting streams. Her headlights turned from sharp beams into hazy cones. Reflective signs flared brighter than usual, the letters swimming slightly. Dana eased her speed down a little. Not enough to be a hazard to anyone behind. There was no one behind, but enough to give herself an extra second to react to anything unexpected. Visibility's dropping, she said to no one, keeping herself anchored with the sound of her own voice. Conditions changing. That's all this is. The clock showed 2:41. A small rectangular sign flashed by on the right. Mile 204. Her stomach did a slow, uneasy turn. A minute later. Mile 205. Her pulse climbed, not fast but steadily, a rising metronome inside her chest. She leaned forward slightly, scanning the faint outlines of the road, the shoulders, the dim brush of fog beyond. Mile 206. Her headlights found the marker, and she spoke it aloud before the numbers had fully resolved. Saying it made it real, made it manageable. Mile 207. The fog pressed in thicker now, a soft white wall beyond the edge of the beams. The world reduced itself to the 30 or 40 yards ahead of her, the blinking lights of her own dash, and the occasional ghostly flash of a reflector pole as it slid past. The CB clicked. Just once. Not a burst of static, not a full voice. Just a sharp, clean click, like someone had pressed the talk button and let it go without saying anything. Dana's hand hovered inches from the radio. She didn't touch it. Mile 208, she whispered when the sign appeared. The air in the cab felt cooler than before, though she hadn't adjusted the controls. She breathed in and felt the cold slide down into her lungs, nestling there. Up ahead, the glow of an overhead sign began to bleed through the fog, pale green and hazy. She knew what it would say before it came into focus. Mile 209. She drove under it as if passing some unseen threshold. The CB came alive. Nobody's stopping, they're just driving into it. The same voice, strained now, cutting through a wash of interference. Behind it for a second, Dana could make out other sounds. Honking, the screech of tires, the dull, sickening crunch of... She flinched and shut that thought down, refusing to let her mind fill in visuals it didn't need. Eastbound on 209. You gotta slow it down. You gotta move over, you. The voice broke apart, clipped mid-word. An image rose unbidden in her mind. A man hunched over a radio in a cab long gone, calling out into a night no one could hear anymore. The shiver that went through her had nothing to do with the cool air. The fog ahead thickened until it became a single, unbroken wall of white. Beyond it, nothing. Not darkness, not shapes, simply absence. Every training instinct she had screamed at her not to drive blind into that. Without fully deciding to, she eased off the throttle and guided the rig toward the shoulder, wheels humming as they crossed the rumble strip. She slowed until she was crawling, then stopped completely, hazards clicking on in a comforting rhythm. The wall of fog waited just ahead of her bumper, a solid swirling curtain. The air smelled faintly different near it, damp and cold, with a metallic hint she couldn't quite identify. The CB hissed. Then, very softly, the same man's voice came through again, almost calm now. Don't go in, eastbound. Just give it a minute. Dana stared at the radio. Who are you? She asked, before remembering she had to press the button. She thumbed it, repeated. Who are you? What's in there? She released the button and heard only the thin crackle of static. Her hazard lights ticked on and off, painting the nearby fog with pulsing amber. The highway behind her remained empty. No approaching headlights, no distant glows. She waited. 30 seconds. A minute. 2. The fog wall did not move, but something within it seemed to. Not shapes exactly, more like changes in density, brief dim pressures where the white thickened and thinned. She realized her hands were trembling slightly on the wheel. She flexed them, took a controlled breath, and reached toward the radio again. Before she could speak, a new sound filtered through the static. Not a voice this time. A high, faint wail oddly stretched, like a siren played on a tape that had been slowed down just a little too much. It rose, fell, then vanished. Dana's skin crawled. There shouldn't have been sirens out here. Not this far from any town, in this kind of emptiness. Slowly, the solid wall of white began to thin. The clean edge mottled, becoming patchy. Through it, faintly, she saw the suggestion of taillights far ahead, drifting away like the last embers of a fire. In another 30 seconds, the fog had retreated enough that she could see the road stretching ahead once more, still shrouded in low mist, but no longer blocked. She waited another full minute, counting the seconds. Nothing changed. Finally, she clicked off the hazards, eased the truck back into gear, and rolled forward at a cautious pace. As she eased past where the fog wall had stood, she saw nothing. No skid marks, no debris, no broken guardrail, just damp pavement reflecting her headlights, and the empty expanse of open highway. Mile 210, she said softly when the next marker appeared. The CB remained silent. She drove on, the miles ticking away, the fog slowly dissolving until only a few scraps of it remained in low ditches. Traffic began to appear again in the far distance. A set of headlights approaching from behind, another pair ahead moving the opposite direction. Little signs that the world had returned to its usual shape. Near dawn, she rolled into a busy service plaza, parked among a line of trucks, and went inside to stretch her legs and grab a fresh coffee. The chatter here was mundane and grounding complaints about fuel prices, jokes about dispatch, small-town sports scores. At a corner table, two older drivers talked in low voices. Dana wasn't listening at first, but a phrase floated over that caught her attention. Back before they rebuilt that stretch near the river. Pile up in the fog. Mile 209. Whole mess of them. Heard some of those calls over the radio myself. She turned slightly. One of the men noticed her glance and gave a small, acknowledging nod. "They say sometimes you can still hear 'em on a bad night," he added, like it was nothing more than a spooky campfire anecdote. Like the airs got those signals stuck on repeat. Dana didn't tell them she'd been out there an hour earlier. Didn't mention the wall of fog or the voice telling her to wait. She just wrapped her hands around the warmth of her coffee cup and watched the sky outside lighten shade by shade, thinking of a man at mile 209 who might still be calling into a channel that almost no one listened to anymore. And on every run afterward, whenever she approached that river crossing and the mile markers began to climb toward that familiar number, she made sure her CB was on, the volume turned up just enough, listening for any hint of a voice from a night that hadn't quite let go. Story number 3. Evan had been driving long enough to know that most loads were just that weight on wheels, wrapped in paperwork and schedules, pallets of this, crates of that. He didn't care what was in the trailer as long as it was strapped, sealed, and on time. This one was different from the start, though he didn't realize it right away. He picked up the trailer just after dusk at a regional distribution center on the outskirts of a quiet city. The lot lights buzzed overhead, bathing rows of trailers in a washed-out yellow. Clipboards, scanners, signatures, business as usual. The yard manager, a broad-shouldered man in a reflective vest, handed him the manifest without much eye contact. "Drop it at the night depot on Harrow Road," the man said. "Terminal will log you in." Evan frowned down at the page. No consignee name, just an address and a note. Delivery window, 1. 0 amperes. M. 3. 0 amperes. M. Harrow Road? He asked. "That's the industrial park by the river? Keep your GPS on," the manager said, already walking away. "It'll route you in." The seal on the trailer's doors was a dull metal band stamped with the company logo. Nothing strange about that. When he cranked down the landing gear and hooked up, though, the truck's onboard scale gave him a number that made him pause. He ran the math in his head. The manifest listed the load as dry goods, mixed. The weight printed on the page was much lighter than what his gauges showed. He checked his brakes, his lines, walked a slow loop around the rig. Everything looked fine. No bulging, no sagging. Tires tired of the day, but solid. The trailer itself carried no special markings, just the usual company logo and faded DOT numbers. "Maybe they forgot to update the paperwork," he muttered, climbing back into the cab. He fired up the engine, let the idle settle into a low, steady rumble, and pulled out of the yard. For the first 40 minutes, the route was familiar. City lights gave way to darkening suburbs, then to stretches of two-lane highway bordered by fields and occasional silhouettes of barns. The sky overhead deepened to velvet, stars pressing through between thin strips of cloud. His GPS glowed on the dash, faithfully tracing his path. The female voice he had long ago gotten used to gave calm directions. "In half a mile, merge onto State Route 16. He merged. He drove. The city behind him shrank to a distant orange smudge. It wasn't until he was well outside town that the first oddity slipped in. "Continue on unlisted road for 22 miles, the GPS said. Evan blinked. He glanced at the map. The line representing his route continued in a straight shot, but the road name field was blank, just a gray bar where letters should be. Out the windshield, the green sign by the shoulder clearly read, State Route 16 East. He frowned, tapped the map, zoomed out. The interstate grid, the small towns, the river, they all showed up. But the road he was on no longer had a label. "Software glitch," he said, reassuring himself more than anything. It happened. Updates went sideways. Map data got scrambled. He thumbed the radio on low, letting soft, static, and distant voices smooth out his nerves. The miles rolled by. The land sloped gradually downward toward the river valley. The night settled thick and soft around the truck. Headlights carved twin lanes ahead. Taillights glowed a calm red behind. He should have met more traffic than he did. This route usually carried a steady trickle of other trucks and late-night cars. Tonight, they were few and far between. Now and then a pair of headlights crept up in the mirror and eased past. Then he'd be alone again with the white lines and the hum of the engine. After another half hour, the GPS chimed. Prepare to exit right onto Harrow Road in 1 mile. He relaxed a little. Address matched. Everything catching up to normal. The overhead sign appeared in the beams. Harrow Road, Industrial District. 1 mile. See? He said softly. Just another drop. He flipped on his turn signal as the ramp approached. The truck leaned gently into the curve, tires buzzing over ridged concrete. Ahead, the darkness of the industrial park unfurled. Low buildings, fenced lots, sodium lamps casting small islands of light. The GPS zoomed in, showing a grid of streets labeled in neat, printed text. Harrow Road, Briggs Lane, Terminal Avenue. At the center of it all, a blinking dot marked Night Depot, 13 Harrow Road. He followed the digital path. Right turn, left, over a set of old train tracks that thumped under his tires. The buildings here were older than he expected. Brick walls, small windows, faded company names painted on the sides in letters that had peeled with time. The Night Depot, when it came into view, looked exactly like something from 20 years ago. A squat concrete building with a long row of loading docks, a chain-link fence around the lot, a small guard shack at the entrance. Floodlights on tall poles cast a cold, even glare across the pavement. Only one problem. No trucks, no cars, no movement at all. Evan slowed to a crawl as he approached the gate. It stood open, the heavy steel arms swung wide, as though frozen mid-shift change. The guard shack windows reflected his headlights back at him, black and blank. He pulled up beside the shack and rolled his window down. Cool, slightly damp air drifted in, carrying the faint smell of river water and concrete. "Night Depot?" he called. "Delivery for 13 Harrow?" His voice sounded small in the open space. No one answered. He checked the clock on the dash. 1:28 a.m., well within the window. The GPS cheerfully announced, "You have arrived." He hesitated, then eased forward into the lot. The pavement here was older, pitted in places. Painted lines for truck parking had faded to pale ghosts. The loading docks loomed ahead, their big bay doors shut. Dock numbers were stenciled above them in bold black, 1 through 18. In the far corner of the yard, a single office window on the second floor glowed with a dim yellow light. Evan let his rig roll to a stop near the docks and set the brakes. The engine idled, steady and comforting. He watched the building for a moment, expecting a door to open, a security guard to step out, someone to wave him toward a bay. Nothing moved. Finally, he killed the engine. The sudden quiet rang in his ears. He climbed down from the cab. His boots touched the ground with a small crunch. There was a thin layer of gravel and dust on the asphalt, undisturbed, except for his own tire tracks. The air was still. No hum of refrigeration units, no clank of forklifts, no distant traffic from the street beyond the fence. He walked toward the nearest door, a small metal one beside Dock 3 with a "Shipping divided by receiving" sign over it. The handle turned easily. The door swung inward, with a dry creak. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cardboard, cleaning solution, and something else he couldn't place, like stale coffee and old paper. Fluorescent panels glowed overhead, not bright, but enough. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, leading to an office with a glass window. Clipboards hung on hooks along the wall. A corkboard was cluttered with old notices, their corners curled. He stepped up to the office window and peered inside. The room had the look of being frozen mid-shift. An open binder on the desk. A mug with a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. A jacket hanging on the back of a chair. A small lamp on one corner of the desk was turned on, its shade casting a warm little circle on the scattered papers. There was no one in the chair. Evan knocked on the glass, then tried the door. It opened easily. "Hello?" he called. "Driver here for the Night Depot. I've got a drop for 13 Harrow." Silence. He stepped inside, careful not to brush any of the papers. A wall clock ticked softly above the desk. He glanced at it. The hands pointed to 12:17. He checked his watch. 1:32. The difference made his skin prickle. But clocks got off. Batteries slowed. He focused on the practical. On the desk, a ledger lay open to a page full of handwritten entries. Dates, truck numbers, check marks. The last recorded delivery was from 6 months earlier. Before that, the entries stretched back years. The most recent line, the one at the top, listed a truck number he didn't recognize, and a consignee marked only as Oaf, route, load. The dock number was written so heavily, it had nearly torn the paper. 13. Evan looked up. The row of docks outside, as he'd seen them, stopped at 18. But as he glanced through the office window now, his gaze snagged on something that didn't fit. Between docks 12 and 14, where there had been a solid stretch of wall, a door now stood. A dock door, just like the others. Rolling metal, black bumper guards, the number stenciled boldly above it. Sursan. He stared, heart thudding a measured, stubborn beat. He was sure, absolutely sure that door hadn't been there when he pulled in. The stretch between 12 and 14 had been blank concrete. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. Maybe he'd missed it. Maybe the angle of his lights had played tricks. Maybe. He left the office, letting the door close softly behind him, and walked back out into the yard. The row of docks loomed closer now, 1 through 12. Then, without seam or patch or any sign of modification, 13. Then, 14 through 18. As normal as if they'd always been that way. The number above dock 13 felt bolder than the others somehow, the paint darker, as if it hadn't had time to fade. His truck sat at an angle near the row. The path from his current position to dock 13 was open. No trailers blocked it. The seal on his trailer tugged at his mind. The weight reading on his gauges. The blank line on the manifest where a more detailed description should have been. He stood there, caught between the heavy, learned instinct to get the job done, and a quieter, older instinct, deep in his gut, that told him something was off. A sound drifted across the yard, so gentle he almost missed it. The hollow, distant clack of a dock plate dropping into place. It came from somewhere inside the building, behind dock 13, as if someone on the other side had just set up for a trailer. His mouth felt suddenly dry. This is ridiculous, he told himself. You've been on the road too long. It's a night drop. They want you in 13. That's it. The loaded quiet of the place pushed against that logic, but habit won. He turned on his heel, climbed back into the cab, and started the engine. The truck's familiar rattles and vibrations steadied him. He lined up carefully with dock 13, checking his mirrors, moving slow. The concrete bumpers of the dock framed his trailer as he reversed, the beeper chirping a measured rhythm as he eased back. He felt the gentle thud as the trailer kissed the dock. He set the brake, killed the engine, and for a moment just sat there, listening. Through the thin wall between the cab and sleeper, he could hear vague, muted thumps from inside the building, the kind of sounds that meant someone was walking on the trailer floor, a pallet jack rolling, a door unlatching, except the trailer doors were still sealed. He hadn't broken the band. He climbed down again, walked to the rear of the truck, and stood facing dock 13. The steel of the door loomed above him. The gap between the trailer and the weather seal at the top was as it should be. No obvious way in or out. He ran his fingers over the seal on the doors. It was unbroken. The stamped logo stared back at him. Another soft thump came from inside the trailer. Closer this time, a sort of sliding sound, like something heavy shifting across plywood. Evan took a slow breath. "All right," he said, more to the closed door than to himself. "If you're going to unload, you'll have to break the seal from your side somehow." He reached into his pocket and brought out his phone. No service bars. Not one. He held it up higher. Still nothing. The world outside the fence was less than 100 yards away. And yet no signal crept in. He stood a long moment, then did the simple, obvious thing. He cut the seal himself, swung the trailer doors open, and braced for something. The space inside was dim, lit only by the pale spill of yard light and the small, round fixture on the ceiling of the trailer. Rows of pallets stretched away into the gloom, wrapped in opaque plastic. Nothing moved. He stepped up, one boot on the trailer floor, and listened. No shuffling, no voices, no machinery. Just his own breath. He nearly convinced himself he'd imagined the noises. Then, from the building beyond the closed dock door, he heard the same dock plate clack again, in the exact same rhythm as before, as if the sound itself were looping. He backed down, closed the doors and relatched them, the metal bar cold under his fingers. Enough. He could not deliver to an empty building with no one to sign, no one to check the freight, no one to answer basic questions. Back in the cab, he grabbed the clipboard with the manifest and scribbled a brief note on the bottom. No contact at location. Building appears closed. No personnel present. Did not offload. He set the truck in gear, pulled away from Dock 13, and turned a slow circle in the empty yard. As he passed the front of the building, he glanced up. The office window that had been lit a half hour earlier was now dark. He found his way back to the gate, rolled out onto Harrow Road, and headed toward the main highway. His GPS recalculated. Rejoining route in 0.3 miles, it said calmly. On the map, the night depot icon blinked once more, then faded away, leaving only a blank patch where Harrow Road cut through the industrial park. Evan looked in the mirror. The depot lot sat behind him, dark and still. On impulse, he slowed enough to read the faded sign by the entrance. The company name was nearly gone, but a smaller, metal plaque beneath it still showed a few legible words. Terminal closed. No public access. The date beneath was from nearly a decade earlier. He stared at it as it slipped out of his mirror's view. His fingers tightened around the wheel, knuckles pale in the dashboard glow. At the first truck stop with lights and people, he pulled in and called dispatch. Told them the drop location was dark, that he hadn't been able to make delivery. There was a short silence on the other end of the line, the kind that meant someone was scrolling through screens. Harrow Road? The dispatcher repeated slowly. We don't have any active depots on Harrow. You sure about that address? Evan read it off from the manifest, every number and letter. The dispatcher checked again. 13 Harrow Road isn't in the system, she said finally. Nearest terminal we have out there is over on Briggs. I'll reassign the load. Get some rest. After the call ended, Evan sat for a while in the parking lot, surrounded by the ordinary comfort of other trucks, buzzing lights, and the low murmur of human voices. Later, curiosity pushed him to search his maps. 13 Harrow Road existed as an address, tagged as former freight terminal. Satellite images showed an empty slab of concrete, half collapsed, weeds growing in the cracks. No building, no lights, no rows of docks. He never did find a record of the night depot his manifest listed. But sometimes, on late runs near that same valley, if he glanced toward the industrial district at just the right angle, he thought he saw a low block of shadow where the terminal should have been. And on nights when the air was especially still, his radio would pick up a faint, mechanical clack, like a dock plate settling into place somewhere just beyond the reach of the present. He made sure, after that, to double-check every unfamiliar address before he accepted a load. And if dispatch ever mentioned Harrow Road again, he planned to say the route was closed. Story number 4. Linda had spent most of her career in older trucks, the kind where the most advanced technology was a reliable radio and a half-decent GPS. Lately, though, her company had upgraded the fleet new tractors with sleek dashboards, lane-keeping sensors, collision warnings, and, most noticeably, a two-way dash cam mounted behind the windshield. They called the system Guardian Eye. It watched the road, watched the cab, and sent little alerts to the safety office whenever it thought something wasn't quite right. At first, Linda had disliked it. The tiny screen above the console showed a live feed of her own face in one corner and the highway in the other, surrounded by digital overlays and neat white boxes that appeared whenever the system detected something it thought was important. But after a while she stopped really seeing it, the same way she stopped really hearing the hum of the engine. The camera became just another bit of modern clutter in an otherwise familiar workday. On this particular night, she was hauling a load of dry goods across a long desert stretch between distribution centers. The run was simple on paper. Wide highways, few curves, good visibility. The weather forecast was clear. No storms, no fog, just a moonless sky and a long, straight ribbon of asphalt cutting through rock and scrub. Her route took her along Highway 63 Spur, a less-used connector between two major interstates. It saved about an hour compared to taking the bigger loop, and dispatch favored it whenever the schedule was tight. Lonely, but easy. One of the other drivers had said earlier that afternoon, as they'd swapped stories by the fuel pumps. Just watch for critters, and the occasional surprise construction. Linda didn't mind lonely. She liked the feel of the world narrowing down to the truck, the lane lines, and the soft glow of the dashboard. Around midnight, with her thermos of coffee half empty and the radio turned low, she guided the big rig onto the spur and watched the last glow of town lights disappear behind her. The sky out here was black and deep. No city glow on the horizon, no farmhouses with porch lights in the distance, just stars scattered in such numbers that they looked like frost on glass. The road ahead ran straight, flanked by low, rocky rises and patches of scrub that turned silver in the headlights. Gardy and I watched with her. Little icons pulsed gently in the corner of the dash display. Lane detected, speed acceptable, driver attentive. Every so often, the system drew a faint green box around the taillights of a distant car or the reflection of a road sign, tracking objects of interest. For the first hour on the spur, everything was normal. She checked her mirrors, checked her gauges, kept the speed to a comfortable, safe 58. The highway was nearly empty once. A pair of headlights came toward her, then vanished behind in a wash of white. After that, nothing. Around 1:30 a.m., the first odd alert chimed. A soft tone sounded, different from the usual lane drift ping. On the screen, a yellow triangle appeared over the road feed. Pedestrian detected, the synthesized voice said calmly. 1 o'clock. Linda's hands tightened instinctively on the wheel. She leaned forward, eyes scanning the stretch of pavement, illuminated by her headlights. There was no one there. The road ahead lay empty, its surface smooth and pale. The shoulders were clear. The scrub beyond barely moved in the dry, still air. She darted a glance at the Guardian Eye display. The road view replayed the last second in a small box. A faint, pale outline stood on the right side of the frame, on the shoulder tall, narrow, vaguely human-shaped. The system had traced a neat red rectangle around it. Then the replay ended and the live feed resumed. The shoulder was empty again. Probably a sign, she muttered. Post. Something. Sometimes the system misread reflectors, she knew. It was tuned to be cautious. That's what the training video had said. Still, her heart took a moment to settle. For the next few miles, she watched the shoulders more carefully than usual. There were indeed a few short metal posts with reflectors hammered into the ground at intervals. 1 or 2 low, battered signs announced mile markers. Nothing that looked remotely like the tall, pale shape she thought she'd seen in the replay. The road dipped slightly, then climbed. The stars wheeled overhead as the truck eased along the gentle grade. 15 minutes later, the alert sounded again. Pedestrian detected. 11 o'clock. Distance. 40 meters. The yellow triangle flashed brighter this time. A thin, insistent tone beeped twice. Linda's gaze snapped to the center of the lane ahead. Her breath hitched. For a fraction of a second, there was something there right in the center of the road. Not fully solid, not exactly transparent either. A suggestion of a person standing, turned slightly away from her, head bowed. No details, no clothes, no face. Just the impression, like an afterimage on the eye. Then the truck reached that point in the road, and the shape vanished. The asphalt rolled under her tires. Unbroken. She exhaled slowly, realizing only then that she'd been holding her breath. Guardian Eye, cancel, she said out of habit. Though the system didn't really understand spoken commands, the microphone would log her words for some safety review later, but it wouldn't change what the camera saw. On the screen, the replay popped up again. Frame by frame, it showed the road. Then the pale, half-there figure in the middle of the lane, boxed in red. The label in the corner read, Pedestrian. High confidence. Maybe you're malfunctioning, she murmured, glancing at the small green light that indicated the system was healthy. It burned steadily, untroubled. She considered pulling over to the shoulder, rebooting the unit, maybe even calling dispatch to ask if there'd been any advisories about this stretch. But the shoulder was narrow here, and the nearest wide turnout was still miles ahead. Besides, the road itself was clear. Her eyes told her that, whatever the sensor thought, she tightened her grip on the wheel and kept going. The next alert came sooner. Obstacle detected. 1 o'clock. Distance, 60 meters. This time, the tone had an edge to it. The collision warning icon blinked red once, then settled to amber when no impact followed. Linda saw nothing but highway. The replay showed a darker, lower shape straddling the lane line. It could have been a chunk of tire, or a box, or almost anything. But there was nothing on the actual pavement now. No bump, no thump under the tires. Her scalp prickled. She reached down and turned the radio up a bit, letting music fill the cab. The familiar song grounded her, but it also made the silence between notes more apparent. Out here, there was no faint whine of nearby engines, no distant swish of other vehicles. Just her, the truck, and the systems watching them. As the miles ticked by, the alerts increased. Sometimes Guardian Eye flagged pedestrians on the shoulder, tall, thin flickers that disappeared when she tried to focus on them. Other times it warned of obstacles in the road that were gone by the time she reached them. At one point, the inward-facing camera threw up a prompt on the screen. Driver distraction detected. A small caption appeared under her own face. Eyes off road, 2.1 seconds. But she knew, absolutely knew that she had been staring straight ahead, unblinking. "Now you're just making things up," she said tightly. She tried to ignore the device, to pretend it wasn't there. That only kind of worked. Every new tone sent a little jolt through her, even when she told herself not to react. Around 2:10 a.m., the highway crested a low rise, and a faint orange glow appeared far ahead, flickering on the horizon. The river town at the spur's eastern end, she thought with relief. Lights, people, normalcy. Guardian Eye shimmed again. Collision warning. Brake now. The tone this time was not gentle. A loud, urgent beeping filled the cab. The collision icon flashed red, and a bold message took over the small screen. Imminent. Impact. Before Linda could fully process that, the truck reacted on its own. The automatic braking system seized the moment. Air hissed, and the rig began to decelerate hard, the seatbelt cutting across her shoulder as inertia pushed her forward. "Easy," she snapped, instinctively feathering the pedal herself, guiding the deceleration so the trailer stayed straight. Her eyes were wide, scanning the road, hunting for whatever had triggered the system. There was nothing. No car stopped ahead, no stalled truck, no animal bolting across the lane. The road unwound in her headlights as clean and empty as before. She brought the truck down to a crawl, then eased it onto the shoulder, hazard lights ticking on and off, bathing the rocks to her right in amber flashes. Her heart thudded. It took a few breaths before her hands stopped shaking. She shifted into neutral, kept her foot on the brake, and just listened. The engine idled steadily. The night outside remained still. "Guardian Eye, you and I are going to have a talk," she muttered. On the dash, the system had already switched to an automatic replay. It showed the view from moments before the braking. The road ahead, the faint horizon glow. And then, suddenly, a shape. This time it was fully in her lane, dead center. Bigger than a person, taller than her hood, stretched out wide. In the grainy low-light footage, it looked like another truck sideways across the road, its trailer blocking both lanes. There were no headlights, no reflective tape, no identifying marks. Just a dark, solid obstruction where there had been empty highway seconds earlier. The system had highlighted it in a thick red outline. Below the image, text read, "Stationary vehicle. Confidence 96%. She watched, replaying the moment 3 times. Each time, the shadowy bulk loomed, immobile, unyielding. Each time, the instant playback ended just before her brakes took hold. Out the windshield now, the road ahead was still empty. No wreck, no skid marks stretching away into the dark. Unless, a thought stirred at the back of her mind. She set the parking brake, grabbed her flashlight, and stepped carefully down to the shoulder. The night air was cool and dry, with the faint dusty scent of desert present even here. Her hazards kept time behind her, painting the asphalt in slow, rhythmic flashes. She walked forward along the white line, beam angled low. 50 yards ahead, she found them. Skid marks. 2 dark, slightly glossy streaks ran down the center of her lane side by side, as though left by a set of locked tractor wheels. They extended up the slight incline and vanished abruptly in the middle of the highway, as if swallowed. She knelt, touched the marks lightly. The rubber was dry, rough-edged. Not fresh from her own emergency braking, hers were shorter, closer to where her truck now Saturday. These were older, baked slightly into the surface. She followed them a little farther. At their terminal point, there was nothing. No debris in the shoulder, no damaged guardrail. Just open air and a drop-off beyond the edge where the land sloped away into a shallow ravine. A breeze moved across the rocks below, carrying the faintest hint of something metallic and old. Linda straightened, the beam of her flashlight cutting across the empty lanes. Her thoughts crawled across possibilities. A crash some years back. A truck cresting the rise. meeting something or someone in its path, braking too late. The scars of that moment left in the pavement, invisible unless you knew where to look. She looked back toward her own rig. The hazard lights winked steadily in the dark, a familiar beacon. When she climbed back into the cab, she sat for a while, one hand resting on the wheel, the other on the edge of the Guardian Eye unit. "Whatever you thought you saw," she said quietly, "you kept me from finding out the hard way." The system did not respond. Its small green status light glowed calmly. She eased the truck back into gear, checked her mirrors, and rolled forward again, this time a little slower, a little more aware of how many things could happen in the space of a few seconds on an empty road. As she passed the spot where the old skid marks ended, the collision warning icon flickered once, then stayed dark. The rest of the drive off the spur was uneventful. The distant town lights grew brighter, turning from a faint smear to a clear cluster of street lamps and signs. Traffic reappeared, a sedan here, a box truck there, each one a reassurance that she was back in the ordinary flow of other people's lives. At the receiving yard, while a dock crew worked her trailer, she sat with a cup of coffee in the break room and scrolled through her phone. Out of curiosity, she searched the name of the highway spur, adding words like accident and closure. It didn't take long to find it. A brief article from 3 years earlier. Driver killed in nighttime collision on Highway 60, 3 spur. The piece mentioned low visibility over a rise, a truck sideways across both lanes, another unable to stop in time. No photos, just a simple summary, but the details matched the shadow Guardian Eye had shown her, a dark shape lying in wait where there should have been no one. The article didn't explain why her modern sensors had seen something that wasn't there anymore. It didn't have to. She closed the browser and sat for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of the yard voices, the beep of forklifts, the thump of pallets moving, all so solid, so here. On her next run through that region, dispatch offered her the choice. Take the spur again, or loop the long way around. Linda hesitated only a second before selecting the spur. But when the night deepened and the highway rose toward that familiar crest, she kept one eye on the road and one on the little screen where Guardian Eye watched with her, ready to draw boxes around whatever it thought still lingered on that stretch. And if, now and then, she muttered a quiet thanks to an unblinking electronic eye for seeing what she couldn't, that was between her and the empty miles. Story number 5. Most nights, Carla treated the road like an old coworker. Not exactly a friend, not exactly an enemy, but something she knew well enough to read. When it was about to turn mean, when it was safe to relax a little, she hauled a refrigerated trailer on a regular loop through the mountains, a route most drivers either loved or refused. Long climbs, sudden drops, and narrow 2-lane stretches carved out of rock. In summer, the curves were just a test of skill. In winter, they could be something else entirely. Tonight was late autumn. No snow yet, just a hard edge to the wind and a darkness that felt thicker under the pines. Her rig purred steadily as she climbed, dash lights painting her hands in soft green. The trailer temperature stayed level. Fuel was good. Coffee still warm in the stainless mug. She liked this run mostly. The mountains meant fewer cars, fewer distractions. Just her, the engine, and the persistent smell of pine when she cracked the side window. Near midnight, she rolled past a small cluster of truck stop lights, the last real signs of town for a long while, and followed the highway as it narrowed from 4 lanes to 2. A big green sign loomed at the merge. Mountain Pass. Next service is 72 miles. She settled in for the climb. The CB had been quiet most of the evening, just a few bits of chatter about speed traps and weather. As she started up the grade, someone's voice crackled in for a second or two, too broken to make out, then faded to static again. Carla kept her speed steady, watching her engine temp, hugging the right side of the narrow lane to give herself a little psychological room from the drop-off on the left. A steel guardrail ran along that side, intermittent in places, showing dark gulfs of space between its posts. She'd been through here enough to know the places where the land simply fell away beyond the edge. The kind of drop you didn't come back from. Truckers had their share of stories about this pass, of course. One in particular had a way of coming up around diner tables. Something about a rig that went over the side one foggy night and kept right on driving the route in some other way. She'd half-tuned those stories out over the years, slotting them with all the other highway legends. Still, she found herself thinking about that tale now, as the road wound higher and the pine trees closed in. Her mirrors showed only her trailer and the long, empty strip of pavement behind. No headlights in sight. The first switchback came and went. She took it smoothly, the engine lugging just enough to remind her of the weight behind her. The sky above was pitch black, stars hidden behind a film of cloud that had crept in while she drove. Around the next bend, as the grade eased slightly, an old song drifted into the cab. Carla frowned and glanced at the radio. She hadn't turned it on. The display was off, dark. Her phone lay face down in the cup holder, screen asleep. But the music was clear and thin, like it was coming from far away through a bad speaker. A simple country tune, steel guitar, and a man's voice singing about heading west and never looking back. The kind of song that would be on the AM band at 2 in the morning, playing to anyone still awake enough to care. After a few bars, it cut off mid-verse. Silence rushed into the space it left, seeming louder than the sound itself had been. Carla's scalp prickled. She reached out and tapped the radio on. The display flickered to life, already set to a talk station. A late-night host droned about something trivial. No music. She snapped it off again. Static whispered from the CB, then died. "Just bleed over," she muttered, though she knew that wasn't really how any of this worked. Old signal bouncing around. The road climbed. The edge on her left dropped off more steeply now, indicated only by the guardrail and the vague sense of space pressing against the darkness. The speed limit signs for trucks dropped to 40, then 35. Carla obeyed, letting the engine do most of the work. For a while there was nothing but the familiar rhythm of the drive, the small sway of the trailer, the low hum of tires, the soft creak of something in the sleeper shifting with the grade. Then a glow appeared behind her in the mirror. Distant at first, like a smudge of light on the lower curve of the road, far below. Twin points, climbing slowly after her. Carla glanced back every minute or so, tracking its progress. Another truck, most likely. Not many people pulled this pass at this hour, but the ones who did tended to be like her, comfortable with it. The lights drew nearer. She could tell from their height and spacing that it was probably another rig. The color seemed off, though. Not the crisp white of modern LEDs, not the warm golden beams of older halogens, more of a flat, pale glow. She told herself it was just the way her mirrors handled the reflection. Mile markers slid past. Pine branches leaned over the road, their tips catching the edge of her headlights before sweeping away. The grade steepened a touch. The following lights crept closer. When they were 3 or 4 truck lengths behind, she flipped the CB to channel 19 and keyed the mic. "Southbound, you got a copy?" she said. "You're coming up on my back door pretty quick here." Silence. Just a faint hiss. She tried again. "Southbound behind the reefer on the pass? You got ears?" Nothing. In the mirror, the other truck's headlights seemed to pulse slightly, like they were flickering in and out of the trees. They stayed centered on her lane, unnervingly steady. Carla eased her speed down a bit, giving them a chance to overtake if they wanted. The lights behind did not back off or pull out. They held exactly the same distance. Her shoulders tensed. There were plenty of inconsiderate drivers out there, but most truckers understood the unspoken rules. You didn't tailgate on a grade. You especially didn't tailgate another rig on a narrow mountain pass with a sheer drop on one side. She tried the CB again. "Come on, driver. You can go ahead or hang back, but don't ride my bumper on this road. I don't feel like both of us finding the bottom the hard way." Static. She listened hard. No faint chuckle. No lazy 10 to 4. No sound except her own engine and the soft sigh of wind around the cab. The hair on her arm stood up. Up ahead, a turnout sign appeared, one of those short, gravel-painted bays carved into the mountain so slower vehicles could let others pass. She knew this one. Short, with a rough surface that dipped sharply toward the rock wall. Not ideal, but usable. The trailing lights stayed glued to her mirror, not swaying from side to side, not changing position at all. "Fine," she murmured. "Have it your way." She signaled and eased into the turnout, the right side tires rumbling over the uneven gravel. As she slowed, she waited for the other truck to roar past. It did not. She watched in the side mirror, heart ratcheting up a notch. The glow of the headlights approached, upper beam reaching the curve just behind her. And then, in one blink, they were gone. No engine noise, no air brakes, no shadow sweeping across her cab. Just empty road, winding up into the trees. Carla's fingers tightened on the wheel until her knuckles ached. She sat there with her hazards on for a long 30 seconds, listening to the tick-tick-tick echo off the rock face. The pass felt suddenly vast and hollow around her. "Okay," she breathed, forcing air into her lungs. "You're tired. You've been on this road too many nights. That's all." But fatigue never quite explained how concrete and steel and glass could vanish between one heartbeat and the next. She pulled back onto the road, picking up speed carefully, trusting her muscle memory for the curves. The sky remained stubbornly overcast, blocking even moonlight. Her own headlights became the entire world. For a while, nothing happened. Then the song came back. Same guitar, same voice, same half-cheerful, half-lonely melody about heading west. It skipped in at the exact same line as before, played the same 3 measures, and then cut out. "Not funny," Carla told the dark. Her CB crackled once, softly. A voice slipped through, thin as paper. "Don't stop on the grade. Just keep it mauve." Then gone. Her throat went dry. She swallowed, tapped the mic. "Say again." "You're breaking up." Silence. She left her hand on the radio for a few beats, then pulled it back and returned both to the wheel. The pass straightened out for a short run, one of those deceptive stretches that tempted drivers to speed up before the next bend. Carla kept her pace steady. In the mirror, far behind now, the faintest suggestion of light flickered between the trees. Then, like a scene played in reverse, 2 headlights materialized around a lower curve. She watched, chilled. The distance between them and her didn't seem to change this time. They hung back, just far enough to keep from being clearly defined. Close enough that she knew they were there. She tried not to watch them constantly. That was how mistakes happened, attention split in the wrong places. But every time she glanced up, they were there, unwavering. The next switchback approached. It was sharper, with a guardrail scuffed and dented from countless mirrors and the occasional careless turn. Carla took it carefully, hugging the inside line. As she rounded it, she stole a quick look to her left. Down there, beyond the rail, the land fell away into darkness. Somewhere below lay a tangle of trees and boulders and, if you believed the stories, the rusted shell of a truck that hadn't made this turn one winter. The tale went that the driver had been egged on by another rig riding his bumper, bright lights in his mirrors, pushing him just a little too fast. At the critical moment, he'd drifted wide. That was that. Nobody had ever officially blamed another truck. On paper, it was just loss of control on icy surface. The mountain didn't file witness statements, but talk had a way of filling in gaps. Carla came out of the switchback and checked her mirror. The lights behind took the curve a little wider than she had. For an instant, they seemed to hover right at the edge of the drop. Then they snapped back to the lane, untroubled. No name on the cab, no colored marker lights, just 2 pale orbs in the dark. Her palms were slick now. She wiped one on her thigh, forced herself to breathe from her diaphragm like she'd learned in stressful driving courses. Up ahead, another turnout sign appeared. This one she knew better. A longer, straighter pullout, graveled and level, with room to park fully off the lane. An idea formed, cold and clear. She signaled early, eased into the turnout again, and let the truck roll nearly to a stop. But this time, instead of waiting for the following rig to pass, she kept rolling forward, edging all the way to the far end of the pullout. From there, she had a wider view of the road behind a shallow curve she could watch without relying entirely on mirrors. Her hazard lights blinked steadily as the world narrowed to the strip of asphalt below. The other headlights approached, gliding up the grade with eerie smoothness. As they rounded the curve, their beams should have swept across her rig, catching the chrome, flaring against her reflective tape. They did not. They passed directly through the place where her trailer stood. Through it, for a heartbeat, her entire truck was washed in that pale glow, colors fading, outlines softening, as if another world's light had overlapped hers. Then the ghostly rig continued past on the main lane, climbing into the next bend. From this angle, she could finally see more than just the headlights. The shape of the cab was old-fashioned rounded edges, tall stack pipes, a model she hadn't seen on the road in years. No company name on the door. The trailer behind was a simple, blank rectangle, no logo, no markings. The whole thing looked desaturated, drained of color, like it had been cut out of an old black and white photo and pasted into the night. Her CB hissed, "Don't stop." The voice again, faint and warped, like a recording played too slow. "Keep it moving. No matter what's in your glass. No matter who's on your tail." The phantom rig reached the far side of the turnout and began into the next switchback, climbing toward the place where the worst stories said the ice had been. Carla watched, not daring to blink. At the apex of the curve, the ghost truck drifted just a little too wide. Its outer tires kissed the line. Its trailer wobbled. For an instant, its headlights flared against the guardrail. Then, with no sound, no crunch of metal, no shower of sparks, the entire rig slid sideways through the rail and vanished into the dark beyond. Her hazard lights blinked on, off, on. The CB went quiet. Carla realized she was gripping the wheel hard enough to make her joints ache. She forced her fingers to loosen, one by one. The night seemed to exhale. The oppressive stillness that had built around her eased. The song did not return. No stray music, no ghost voices. Slowly, carefully, she signaled and pulled back onto the lane. The rest of the climb felt different. The same curves, the same grades, but with an extra layer of awareness laid over them. She took each bend with deliberate caution, fully expecting those pale headlights to reappear in her mirror. They did not. By the time she crested the pass and started down toward the next town's lights, her shoulders had begun to unknot. The sky lightened barely at the edges, a hint of approaching dawn still a few hours off. At the first decent pullout near the base, she stopped to check her straps, her tires, everything she could physically touch and see. The normal routines of a driver. The world here felt solid. Gravel on her boots, coal needle under her hands, pine needles whispering in a faint breeze. Later that morning, over coffee at a busy truck stop counter, she listened quietly as a couple of drivers at the far end traded stories. "And some folks say if you stop on that grade when someone's pushing you, you'll see him go right past," one said. Yeah, the other replied, waving a hand. "Old ghost truck tale. Keeps rookies from riding bumpers. Works too." They chuckled. Carla didn't join in. She took a slow sip of her coffee and looked out the window, where the mountains loomed faint and blue in the distance. On her next run over the pass, she noticed something. Her instinct, when another vehicle settled too close behind her, even a real one, with a visible driver and a company logo, was sharper now. She'd ease off the throttle sooner, let them pass on a straight stretch, rather than let that pressure build at her back. She never again heard that old country song cut in without warning. Never again saw those washed-out headlights in her mirrors. But every time she reached the long, narrow grade where the guardrail scuffed along the outer edge and the night felt just a little too deep, she kept the CB on, and a quiet promise in mind. She would not be the one to repeat whatever story the mountain had already heard once. And if something unseen rode the road behind her, year after year, reliving a mistake in a loop only it could feel, she could at least make sure she didn't give it company. Story number 6. Miles had driven a lot of different trucks for a lot of different companies, but this one felt different the moment he climbed into it. It wasn't anything obvious. The paint was fresh, the cab was clean, the odometer showed fewer miles than most of the aging tractors he was used to. Someone at the yard had even set a little pine-scented air freshener swinging from the dash vents, but there was a quiet to it that felt occupied. "Unit 742, the dispatcher had said, handing over the keys. "She's a solid puller. Just got out of the shop. Treat her right." In the maintenance bay, one of the older mechanics had wiped his hands on a rag and given Miles a long look. "You taking 742? he'd asked. "Yeah. Problem?" The mechanic hesitated, then shook his head. "Nah, she runs fine now. Just keep her between the lines and don't push your luck. You'll be all right." Miles had assumed that meant there'd been some mechanical issue they'd ironed out. Maybe a coolant problem, a wiring quirk, something like that. He didn't ask. He signed the papers, loaded his duffel into the cab, and got ready for a week-long run. The truck was set up for team driving, 2 bunks in the sleeper, extra cubbies, twin reading lights. But this run was solo. Just him, the highway, and a long stretch of territory between the Midwest and the coast. He liked running alone. No small talk to manage, no other person's habits to work around, just his own routines. The first day went smoothly. He got used to the slightly different feel of the steering, the way the engine liked to sit at a particular RPM on the hills. The seat was newer than what he was used to, firm but forgiving. The radio presets were all over the place, country here, a talk station there, an oldies channel no one had labeled. By late evening, he was out past the last cluster of city lights, rolling along an interstate lined with dark fields and the occasional farmhouse porch glow. He had a solid couple of hours left on his clock before he needed to park. He yawned, rolled his shoulders, turned the radio down to a low murmur. The dash lights painted the cab in soft blue and green. Outside, the world narrowed to the oval of his headlights and the red glimmer of the marker lights along the trailer. Around midnight, he pulled into a busy truck stop, filled his tanks, and grabbed a late meal. He exchanged a few casual words with the cashier, checked the route for the morning, and then headed back to 742 to settle in. He backed into a slot along the outer edge of the lot, set the brakes, and sat for a minute with the engine idling, letting the cab slowly lose the vibration of the road. The sleeper was already made up by whoever had prepped the truck clean sheets, a folded blanket on the lower bunk, an extra pillow on the upper. It was more care than he usually saw put into a fleet tractor. He dropped his duffel onto the lower bunk, kicked off his boots, and stretched out. The sounds of the lot drifted through the thin walls. Distant engines, a refrigerator unit cycling on and off, the faint clatter of someone dragging a bag across. Gravel, comforting, familiar noises. He dozed with the curtain partly open, light from the dash spilling into the sleeper. Sometime in the gray space between awake and asleep, he heard it. The soft, unmistakable rustle of someone shifting on the upper bunk. His eyes snapped open. The cab was dim. The upper bunk curtain hung closed, fabric still. No one else was there. He held his breath, listening. Silence. He told himself it had been the truck settling. Newer cabs had plastic panels that creaked as temperature changed. He rolled onto his side, closed his eyes again. A minute later, there was another sound. This time, it was light but clear. The faint thump of a heel or a palm against the back wall. Up near where the top bunk met the sleeper. Miles sat up, heart beating faster now. He reached for the little switch and turned on the sleeper light. Empty space, blank curtain, his own duffel on the floor, no one else. He let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, rubbed a hand over his face and shook his head. "You're beat," he muttered to himself. Quit jumping at every sound. Sleep eventually came, the way it always did after long hours behind the wheel. When he woke, gray light was filtering in around the curtain. Outside, trucks were already easing out of their spots. He washed up, grabbed breakfast, and got back on the road. The next day followed the same pattern. Long miles, check calls, coffee, a favorite playlist humming quietly from the speakers. Mile markers slipped by in a steady rhythm. If the truck felt strange, he stopped noticing it after a while. New rigs always had their quirks. That night, parked at a quieter rest area tucked into the trees, he crawled into the bunk again. This time, he pulled the curtain all the way closed, letting the slight glow from the parking lot bleed in only at the edges. The forest outside made different sounds, wind and leaves, an owl calling once, the distant whoosh of cars passing on the highway below. He found the noises soothing. At some point in the night, right before sleep fully claimed him, a whisper of movement brushed the air above his face. Not a touch. Exactly. More like a passing displacement. A sense that someone had walked by the foot of the bunk. His eyes opened to darkness. The curtain hung still. The air was still. He listened harder. There it was again. The faint dip and creak of the upper bunk. The muffled sound of weight shifting as if someone were turning over up there, settling into a new position. Miles stayed very still. "Hello?" he said quietly, before he could talk himself out of it. Silence. He reached up and pushed the upper curtain aside a few inches. His fingertips touched cool fabric and then the metal frame of the bunk. Nothing more. He let the curtain fall back and lay staring at the underside of the mattress above, inches from his face, lit by a faint glow from the dash. Eventually, exhaustion won again. On the third day, he asked a question in the shop group text, trying to keep it casual. "Anybody driven 742 before?" A few minutes later, a reply popped up from one of the mechanics. "Used to be a team truck. We refitted it after situation a while back." "Why?" Miles typed and deleted a couple of answers before settling on. "Just getting used to it. Different layout. He didn't ask what situation meant. He could guess. On this job, a lot of bad things were summed up in that single soft word. That afternoon, he fueled at a small station off a 2-lane highway. While he was topping off, an older driver in a faded ball cap walked past, did a double take at the unit number on the side of the cab, and stopped. "You running 742 now?" the man asked. "Yeah," Miles said slowly. "You know the truck?" "Know of it." The man's gaze slid to the sleeper window, then back. "Used to see it on the road all the time. Back when Carter and Jim ran it. Those two practically lived in that rig." He fell silent for a moment, jaw working. "What happened?" Miles prompted gently. The other driver shrugged one shoulder. "Winter. Bad stretch of black ice in the plains. They say Carter fell asleep at the wheel. Truck went into the median and rolled. Jim was in the bunk." He shook his head. "Carter made it. Jim didn't." The fuel nozzle clicked off. Somewhere overhead, a gull cried. The world felt suddenly a little narrower. "They rebuilt the cab," the man went on. "New panels, new glass, gave it a new life. But some of us, we still don't like seeing that number." He seemed to realize he'd said more than he meant to. "Anyway, keep it between the ditches." "Night," he added, and walked away. Miles replaced the nozzle and stood for a long second with his hand resting on the cool metal of the tank. Back on the highway that evening, he couldn't stop thinking about the bunk behind him, about the space above him when he slept. He drove a little more carefully in the dark than usual, hands relaxed but ready, eyes moving in practiced patterns. Mirrors, gauges, road, mirrors. He felt watched, not in a hostile way, more like someone sitting just out of view, making sure he didn't drift too close to the rumble strip. When he did graze the grooves once, fighting a wave of fatigue, something brushed the back of his neck. Light, cool, like the touch of air stirred by a passing hand. He jerked fully awake, heart pounding. The wheel shivered under his grip as he corrected his line. He checked the mirrors. Empty highway. The glow of his own trailer lights. Nothing else. He swallowed, throat dry, and turned the radio up, forcing his brain to stay alert. By the time he parked for the night at a quiet pullout, just a long strip of asphalt beside a stand of trees, he was more tired than he'd admit. He left the engine idling low for warmth, climbed into the bunk, and lay staring at the ceiling. The curtain between cab and sleeper was half open this time, letting him see the faint outline of the steering wheel, the dash lights dimmed to a glow. "Look," he said into the darkness, feeling a little foolish. "I don't know if somebody's here, listening. But I'm not him. I'm not Carter. I'm not gonna fall asleep on the interstate." The truck hummed softly around him. Wind brushed along the side panels with a dry hiss. Somewhere in the trees, a branch creaked. He exhaled. "If you're just checking, that's fine. Just don't start throwing things, all right?" At that exact moment, something soft dropped onto his chest. He flinched and sat up fast, hand going automatically toward his face. It was his own spare pillow. The one that had been sitting on the far corner of the upper bunk. Now it lay in his lap, as if someone had nudged it off the edge. His breath caught. He looked up. The upper bunk's curtain moved just slightly, then stilled. For a long time, he didn't move. Then he picked up the pillow, set it beside him, and lay back. "Okay," he whispered. Message received. Sleep came quickly, heavy and dreamless. The turning point came 3 nights later, on a stretch of highway where the speed limit was high, the traffic light, and the monotony dangerous. It was the deep part of the night, when the body most wanted to shut down. The road was straight, lined by dark fields, and the occasional fence post flashing by like ghostly markers. The hum of the engine and the gentle vibration of the tires had become a kind of lullaby. Miles had been awake too many hours. He knew it. A rest area was still a dozen miles ahead, and every minute between where he was and that safe pull-off felt longer than it should. His eyelids grew heavier. He blinked, forced them open, took a swig of lukewarm coffee. It helped, but only for a moment. The white lines blurred. The guardrail on the right leaned closer. He didn't quite realize he was drifting until the rumble strip roared under the tires, buzzing up through the steering column into his hands. His reaction was half a second too slow. Something gripped his shoulder. Firm, quick, not painful, but urgent. The hand, because it felt exactly like a hand, pulled him sideways just enough that his whole body jerked. His own reflexes kicked in, snapping him fully awake. He corrected, guiding the truck back into the center of the lane, heart thundering. For an instant, in the windshield glass, he saw more than just his own reflection. Beside him, in the passenger seat that had been empty all night, there was the outline of another figure, just a darker shape in the dim reflection, hazy where his was clear. Head turned toward the road, hands not on the wheel, but close as if ready to grab it if he faltered. Then a car passed them in the left lane, headlights washing across the cab. The reflection jumped, and the second shape was gone. Miles drove the next several miles in absolute silence, every sense sharpened. He didn't even look at the radio. He didn't need noise now. Adrenaline kept him wide awake until he pulled into the lit rectangle of the rest area. He parked crooked on the first open line, set the brake, and sat with both hands still on the wheel until the shake in them eased. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice rusty. He wasn't sure who he was addressing. The truck. The empty air. The man who had once slept in the bunk behind him and never made it home. Behind him, the sleeper was quiet, but he felt a easing, as if some tightness in the cab had loosened by a notch. He slept that night with the curtain open. At one point, half awake, he thought he heard the faint creak of the upper bunk again, as if someone had shifted position to see the windshield better. From then on, the presence in the truck stopped feeling like something to be afraid of, and started feeling more like a watchful companion who refused to quite let go of his run. On rough nights, when fog hugged the road or the rain made the lane lines vanish, Miles would feel a tingle at the back of his neck if he drifted too close to the edge. On long grades, when his thoughts wandered, a sudden coolness would brush his forearm, just as his speed crept a little higher than it should. If he spoke into the air, sometimes a soft sound in the sleeper fabric settling, a gentle tap on the wall felt like an answer. He never told dispatch. He never mentioned it to the other drivers swapping tales over coffee. Some things were too easy to laugh off when you hadn't been there. He just kept driving 742. Years later, new hires would sometimes end up with that truck on their first long solo run. Now and then, one of them would come back to the yard with the same faintly puzzled look and say something to the effect of, "You ever feel like somebody's in the bunk with you in that unit?" The older hands would trade glances and shrug. "Keep her between the ditches," they'd say. "If you nod off, she'll let you know." Out on the dark stretches of highway between towns, where the cab lights blur and the road hums the same low song, a driver in a certain truck might feel, just once, a firm hand on their shoulder, just enough to wake them, just enough to keep the story from ending the way it did that winter night, when a different run went wrong and left one man with nowhere else to go but the routes he'd always known. And if, every so often, Miles glanced at the windshield and saw, for a heartbeat, another reflection beside his own, both of them looking straight ahead at the long, empty road, he didn't look away.